Hello everyone, my name is Tax Alba and welcome back to the Lovecraftian Video Game Retrospective and welcome to The Darkness Within, in pursuit of Loath Nolder. This is a very classic point-and-click adventure in which you take the role of Howard Loride, and you're a police investigator and you're in pursuit of the titular Loath Nolder, who is a murder suspect, and he's suspected to be the murderer of Clark Fields, a well-known traveler. And that's all I'm going to tell you about the story, because everything else is pretty much spoiler territory. And this game is very atmospheric, so I don't want to ruin it for you even by mentioning a couple of other things that aren't really big spoilers but could still dampen your enjoyment of the game if you want to check it out for yourself. So as I already mentioned, this game is a point-and-click adventure. It's a very traditional one. You do have a 360-degree view, but you move in increments, so you don't move freely in your environment. And this is both good and bad. It's actually good because the game does require you to do some pixel hunting, so this one reduces it a little bit, but it's also bad because it makes the game rather slow at points, and slower than it needs to be. But I'm going to get back to that a little later. As for the story is actually pretty good, and it kept me going, even at points where the puzzles were a little bit frustrating. And if the story hadn't been good enough, I might have lost my motivation to complete this game. But the story is actually above average. It's not without cliches, and it does have some predictable moments, but it also has some pretty good surprises and a lot of suspense, so I would say that it's generally above average, and it's one of this game's main selling points. As for the gameplay, as already mentioned, it's a classic point-and-click adventure. You explore your environment, you talk to people, you go through dialogue trees, you collect items, you combine items, but there's also a couple of new gameplay elements. There is the so-called thinking frame, so you can gather clues during the game. So when you click on certain items, or you choose dialogue options, or you read notes and you underline stuff, which is another mechanic this game maybe not introduces, but it's not that common of a mechanic. And when you have gathered a couple of clues, you can combine them, then have Howard think about them, and when they make sense to him, then you get a new clue, or you can explore other options in the game. Now this sounds pretty good, and it does work well for the most part, but the interface is a little bit clunky, and at times it's not obvious what you're supposed to combine. For the most part it is, but there are a couple of combinations where I had to resort to just combining everything with everything, the very classical brute force approach to solving puzzles in adventure games, which is occasionally justified, but at times it's just a little bit frustrating, and in my opinion the game should have given you a little more of a hint here. You can actually get hints in this game. There are 3 difficulties: easy, normal and difficult. On easy you get a lot of hints. On normal you have to be in a place for a while and get stuck for a little while before you get hints, and on hard you don't get any hints at all, so you can essentially decide for yourself whether you want the game to help yourself or not. But even if you play on one of the easier difficulties, you still don't have to take the hints, you can just skip them if you want, so it's an entirely optional thing, which is good, because I don't really mind a help function or an easy mode if it's entirely optional and you don't have to take it. So regarding the graphics, this game is of course not a high-end game, but the graphics do the job. They actually look pretty good. A lot of stuff seems to be hand-drawn, which looks quite nice, and the game is very, very atmospheric. It's rather dark in places, but that's to be expected. The only really criticism I have about the graphics is that a lot of the characters, of which there aren't all that many, they look very puppet-like and stiff. Yeah, think about the Necronomicon first-person 3D adventure. The characters in this game don't look quite as hideous, but they still look very subpar, and it's a little bit disappointing. And even considering the game's age, and considering that it's probably not exactly a AAA title, they look really not that great, especially if you combine them to the rest of the environment, which looks a lot better. But that's really a minor criticism, especially because you don't really see all that many other people. Oftentimes you just hear them and you speak with them over the phone, so it's not like that's going to be something that constantly annoys you. As for the puzzle design, as I already mentioned, a couple of those hint combination puzzles can be a little bit frustrating. And overall the game is a very straightforward traditional adventure, but the item and hidden hunting can be a little bit frustrating because you have a bunch of places to go to. It's not actually that many. For the most part of the game it's less than half a dozen, but navigation is very slow. You move in increments, and checking out your environment takes quite a while, because whenever you are on a spot where you can look around essentially in a spherical view, and there could be anything, and oftentimes it's not exactly obvious from which angle you're supposed to approach stuff. For example, if you enter a room and there's a book somewhere on a shelf, then you might have to go towards the shelf, and you can't just click on the book whenever you can see it, which can be a little bit frustrating. Most of the time it's not really an issue, but it can be an issue. There are a couple of puzzles which have to be solved in a very specific order, and I don't mean that it's an order that makes sense. For example, at one point you need to climb down into a hole. You do get a rope, which you do find in a room you enter before you go into the room with a hole, but what you have to do is check out the hole several times. Then you have to check out pipes on the ceiling of the room, have to use the rope on them, have to try to climb down, then check out a light source, and then actually climb down. And if you just try to use a rope or try to grab the light source, it's not going to work. You have to do it in this very specific order, and if you don't do it, you're going to fail. This isn't the case for most of the puzzles actually, but there are a couple of puzzles which get needlessly complicated, because for most of you it will be quite obvious what you have to do, but the game doesn't really give you a hint on the order you have to do it, and to be honest, there shouldn't be a specific order. You should just be able to use a rope or get the light source whenever you want to. But overall it's not too much of a problem, but that in combination with a couple of other factors such as the pixel hunting and the rather slow movement does mean that this game is really only enjoyable if you either extensively use the hint system, which again is pretty good because it's optional, or you are really into these at times a little bit slow and potentially frustrating adventure games, because if you're not, you're probably not going to enjoy this game, even if you are into horror games in general or Lovecraftian games. Regarding the Lovecraftian elements, they are quite subtle, especially at the beginning of the game, which is not necessarily bad, and they are more of the bookish, scholar-like Lovecraftian elements, and they aren't really thrown to your face a lot, which is good, and it does fit the tone and atmosphere of this game, which by the way is excellent, especially due to the sound effects and the music, both of which I haven't really mentioned a lot so far. And I would actually say that this game could be even in the top 10 Lovecraftian games solely based on the Lovecraftian elements and disregarding all other aspects of the game. One final warning about the story: you're probably going to think that the ending is a little bit abrupt, but there is a sequel, and if you have the patience and the will to play through this game, you're probably going to be fine with the sequel as well, but I'm going to check that out next week. So my final verdict is this game does get a definitive recommendation, but only for fans of adventure games. If you aren't really all too fond of this genre and you like Lovecraft, then this game is probably not going to be something for you, because the Lovecraftian elements might not be enough for you to convince you to play it, and you might be better off using the hint system a lot, or maybe just checking out someone's LP of this game. So thanks for watching, and I shall see you next week. Take care and goodbye.